The red warships of the Vorthon Empire appeared in the sky above New Harmony Colony like death itself. Captain Jihu Kim stood frozen at the observation window, watching in horror as bright energy beams sliced through their defense systems like a hot knife through butter. The small mining colony never stood a chance against weapons that could turn solid metal into dust in just seconds. The ground beneath his feet shook violently as another massive explosion lit up the dark space around them. Jihu grabbed onto the metal railing to steady himself, his knuckles turning white from gripping so hard. Through the thick glass he could see their protective shields flickering and sparking as they slowly died under the alien assault. "Captain, sir, they want us to surrender," Communications Officer Myre Park called out from her station. Her voice remained calm and professional, but Jihu could hear the fear hidden underneath. Outside their window, bright flashes continued to tear apart everything they had built on this distant world. Jihu's mind raced as he thought about what this meant. The Vorthons had been unstoppable for over a year now, crushing world after world with frightening ease. 17 different planets had fallen to their advanced technology, and no one had been able to fight back for more than a few days. Their weapons seemed to come from some nightmare, powered by strange mental abilities that made them even more deadly. These weren't just ordinary aliens with better guns. The Vorthons had somehow learned to use their minds to make their technology work in ways that seemed impossible. Their soldiers could appear and disappear like ghosts. Their ships could fire beams that destroyed everything they touched, and their armor looked like it was made from living crystal that could repair itself. "Sir, what should we tell them?" Mirai asked again, her fingers hovering over the communication controls. Through the speakers they could hear the cold, emotionless voice of the Vorthon commander demanding their immediate surrender. Jihu looked around at his crew, seeing the same mixture of fear and determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. These people had families back on Earth, dreams of building something good in the stars, and now it was all about to end. But maybe their sacrifice could mean something. "Send a message to Earth," Jihu ordered, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Tell them everything we've learned about how these aliens fight, their weapons, their tactics, their weaknesses if we found any. Make sure our people back home know what's coming." As Mireille's fingers flew across her keyboard, encoding their final desperate message, the colony's last shield generator exploded in a shower of sparks and metal. Through the observation deck windows, they could see strange lights beginning to form in the air around them. The Vorthons were preparing to send their soldiers directly onto the station, using their teleportation technology. Within moments, armored figures began to appear out of thin air like deadly magic tricks. Their crystalline armor caught the light from the fires burning throughout the colony, making them look like walking diamonds of death. Each soldier moved with perfect mechanical precision, as if they were all controlled by the same mind. Commander Tae-hyun of the Vorthon invasion force materialized on the station's main deck, his tall figure imposing and terrifying. Through his helmet's faceplate, his alien features showed no emotion as he surveyed the humans cowering before him. To him, this was just another easy victory over another primitive species. The Vorthons had conquered so many worlds that they had developed a simple, efficient system. Arrive, demand surrender, destroy any resistance, enslave the survivors, and move on to the next target. It had worked perfectly on every species they had encountered, from the peaceful traders of Kepler-7 to the warrior clans of the Rigel system. These humans seemed no different from all the others. They had weak technology, simple minds, and no real understanding of how to fight a superior enemy. Soon the Vorthon Empire would add Earth itself to their growing collection of slave worlds, and the galaxy would be one step closer to total domination under their rule. General Sun-Ho Lee's weathered hands moved across the holographic controls as he stood in the center of the United Earth Defense Council's war room. The massive chamber buzzed with quiet tension as Earth's top military leaders watched him prepare their briefing. His face, marked by decades of combat experience, looked grimmer than anyone had ever seen it. Behind him, the giant holographic display came to life, showing images that made everyone in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats. Ancient battlefields appeared one after another, each one telling a story of human brutality and survival. The beaches of Normandy, where thousands died in a single day. The frozen ruins of Stalingrad, where soldiers fought over every building. The jungles of Vietnam, where invisible enemies turned trees into weapons. The Vorthans think they understand us, General Sun Ho began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen too much death. They look at our technology and assume we're just another peaceful species that got lucky with space travel. They couldn't be more wrong. The images shifted to show more recent conflicts. The Martian rebellion where human colonists fought each other in the red dust of an alien world. The lunar siege, where soldiers battled in zero gravity among the moon's craters. Corporate wars in the asteroid belt, where miners turned their tools into weapons and fought over chunks of rock floating in space. Admiral Hyejin Choi, her uniform, decorated with medals from a dozen different campaigns, leaned forward in her chair. Her eyes never left the terrible images playing out before them. "General, what exactly are you trying to tell us?" Sun Ho turned away from the display to face the assembled leaders. "I'm telling you that every other species in this galaxy learned to cooperate before they reached the stars. They developed advanced technology through peaceful research and shared knowledge. They built their civilizations on friendship and understanding." He gestured toward the images behind him, where scenes of human warfare continued to play like a nightmare that never ended. "We didn't. We fought for every scrap of progress. We turned science into weapons, exploration into conquest, and survival, into an art form that no other species has ever needed to master." Colonel Dae-hyun Park, his left arm still bearing scars from shrapnel during the brutal lunar siege, stood up slowly. His voice was quiet, but filled with a cold certainty that made everyone listen. "The Vorthans have conquered 17 worlds, but they've never faced anything like us. Those other species were peaceful. They surrendered when faced with superior technology because they didn't know how to fight." The room fell completely silent, except for the soft humming of the holographic projectors. Everyone present understood what these men were saying, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel more real and more terrifying. "We've been preparing for this war for our entire history," Sun Ho continued, his voice growing stronger. "Every battle our ancestors fought, every weapon they created, every cruel lesson they learned about survival has been passed down to us. The Vorthans think they're facing another peaceful civilization." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final blow. "They're about to discover they've attacked the one species in the galaxy that has spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other. We don't just study war in books or simulate it in computers. We live it, breathe it, and dream it." The images behind him shifted one final time, showing human soldiers throughout history. Knights in armor, infantry with rifles, pilots in fighter jets, and marines in powered suits. All of them shared the same hard look in their eyes, the look of predators who had learned to survive by being more dangerous than anything that hunted them. Admiral Hyejin nodded slowly, understanding finally dawning in her eyes. "The Vorthans conquered peaceful worlds, but Earth isn't peaceful. We're the planet that created warriors as our greatest export." The massive Vorthan war fleet tore through the fabric of space itself as they emerged from hyperspace near Earth's solar system. Admiral Veltar stood confidently on the bridge of his flagship, expecting to see another defenseless world cowering before his empire's might. What he found instead made his alien blood run cold with disbelief. Earth's orbital space wasn't empty like the peaceful worlds they had conquered before. Instead, a deadly maze of weapons platforms surrounded the blue planet like angry metal, hornets protecting their nest. Massive railguns pointed outward from converted asteroid mining stations, their dark barrels ready to spit death across the void. Space habitats that should have been peaceful homes for families had been turned into floating fortresses, bristling with missile launchers and energy cannons. But what truly confused Admiral Veltar were the dozens of small ships racing directly toward his fleet at maximum speed. These weren't sleek warships built for battle. They looked like old cargo haulers, mining vessels and freight transporters that had been hastily modified with extra engines and makeshift armor plating. "Admiral, those human ships are not slowing down," his tactical officer reported, his voice filled with confusion as he stared at his sensor readings. "Their course will result in direct collision with our vessels. This makes no strategic sense. On the bridge of the ore hauler Lucky Strike, Captain Inho Seo gripped his controls with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since he volunteered for this mission. His ship used to carry precious metals from the asteroid belt, but now its cargo holds were packed with every nuclear warhead the Earth Defense Force could spare. Behind him, transmitted through his communication system, he could hear the voices of dozens of other volunteer pilots making their final preparations. These weren't professional soldiers or trained fighter pilots. They were ordinary people who had answered Earth's desperate call for volunteers. Retired miners who knew every bolt and rivet of their ships, freight captains who had spent years hauling supplies between Earth and the colonies, civilian volunteers who had never fired a shot in anger but couldn't stand by while their world faced destruction. "This is Captain Inho to all volunteer units," he broadcast on the open channel, his voice growing steadier as he spoke. "Remember what happened to New Harmony. Remember all those innocent people who died because nobody was there to protect them. Today we make sure that never happens to Earth." The response came back from dozens of voices, all of them afraid but none of them backing down. They knew this was a one-way trip, but they also knew that their sacrifice might give Earth's real military forces the time they needed to organize a proper defense. "For New Harmony," Inho screamed into his communicator as his ship's collision alarms began shrieking warnings that he completely ignored. His converted mining vessel slammed into the lead Vorthon dreadnought at nearly the speed of light, and the nuclear warheads in his cargo hold detonated in a blast that lit up space like a newborn star. The explosion tore through the alien ship's forward shields like they were made of paper, sending chunks of crystalline armor and twisted metal cascading through the Vorthon formation. Other volunteer ships followed immediately behind him, each one creating their own devastating fireball as they sacrificed themselves to damage the invading fleet. Admiral Veltar watched in absolute horror as his supposedly invincible dreadnoughts took damage from what should have been harmless cargo ships. His tactical officers scrambled to understand what was happening, but their computers couldn't process the concept of deliberate suicide attacks on this scale. "Sir, the humans are not responding to our standard surrender demands," his communications officer reported, his voice filled with panic. "They appear to be ignoring all of our transmissions completely." The Admiral stared at the tactical display, showing more human ships approaching his fleet with the same suicidal determination. In his 1,000 years of conquest, he had never encountered a species that refused to even negotiate when faced with superior firepower. Every other civilization had at least tried to talk their way out of destruction. These humans seemed to have skipped straight to total warfare without bothering with diplomacy, surrender terms, or any of the civilized conventions that governed conflict in the galaxy. Deep beneath the smoking ruins of Seoul, Staff Sergeant Min-hyuk Yang pressed his back against the cold concrete wall of the abandoned subway tunnel. His face was streaked with a mixture of ash and dried blood, making him look more like a ghost than a soldier. Above their heads, the constant rumble of Vorthon dropships landing more alien troops never seemed to stop, but down here in the darkness, a different kind of war was about to begin. The flickering emergency lights cast strange shadows as Min-hyuk looked around at his unusual team. These weren't the elite soldiers he had trained with at the academy. His unit was a desperate mixture of whoever had survived the initial invasion and was willing to fight back. Regular army soldiers sat next to former street gang members who knew every hidden passage in the city. Civilian volunteers who had never held a weapon before the invasion now carried improvised bombs made from household chemicals. "Listen up, everyone," Min-hyuk whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant sounds of destruction from the surface. "The aliens have better technology, better armor, and better weapons than us. But down here in these tunnels, none of that matters as much. Their big energy cannons won't help them when they can't see us coming." Corporal Ji-won Kim, crouched nearby, carefully checked the timer on her homemade explosive device. Before the war, she had been one of Earth's most skilled special operations soldiers, trained in dozens of different ways to kill enemies quietly and efficiently. Now she was teaching teenagers how to turn fertilizer and cleaning supplies into deadly weapons. "Their fancy crystal armor might stop our bullets," she said quietly, holding up the crude bomb that looked like it had been built in someone's garage. "But physics is physics. Enough explosive force will turn anyone into paste no matter what they're wearing. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the tunnel system as the first Vorthan patrol entered the underground maze. These alien soldiers moved with the same mechanical precision that had conquered 17 different worlds. Their energy weapons hummed with deadly power, and their psionic enhancement devices glowed softly in the darkness. They had cleared hundreds of cities, using exactly the same systematic approach, methodically searching every building and killing or capturing every survivor they found. But subway tunnels weren't like the open streets above ground. Down here, their advanced technology became more of a burden than an advantage. The narrow passages made it impossible to maintain proper formations. The maze-like layout meant they couldn't see attacks coming from multiple directions. And the darkness hid threats that their sensors weren't designed to detect. The first alien soldier never knew what hit him. A maintenance shaft cover exploded upward as 3 humans burst out of the floor like demons rising from hell itself. Their weapons weren't the sleek energy rifles that galactic armies used. Instead, they carried sharpened construction tools, modified power drills, and sledgehammers that could crush alien skulls even through their protective helmets. More humans erupted from storm drains, hidden alcoves, and ventilation shafts that the aliens didn't even know existed. The sterile, organized efficiency of Vorthan military tactics completely collapsed as the tunnel system turned into a nightmare of close-quarters combat where every shadow might hide another attacker. The aliens' energy weapons were designed for long-range precision shooting, not the brutal hand-to-hand fighting that the humans forced upon them. Their crystalline armor, which could deflect laser beams and energy blasts, cracked and shattered under the repeated blows of simple human tools, wielded with desperate fury. Screams echoed through the tunnels, but it was impossible to tell which species they were coming from. The sounds of alien death mixed with human battle cries in a symphony of violence that had never been heard on any of the peaceful worlds the Vorthans had conquered before. Minhyuk Yang smiled grimly as he watched another alien patrol disappear into the maze of tunnels, knowing they would never emerge alive. The invaders were finally learning their first hard lesson about fighting humans on their home ground. Down here in the darkness, advanced technology meant nothing, and everyone bled exactly the same color. Admiral Hyejin Choi stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser Seoul's Fury, her weathered hands gripping the command console as she stared at the holographic tactical display floating before her. The green dots representing the Vorthan supply convoy moved in perfect formation through space, completely unaware that human forces had been tracking them for the past 3 days. Her dark eyes followed every movement of the alien ships, calculating distances, timing, and the precise moment when her trap would spring shut. The aliens might have better technology and more advanced weapons, but they had made a critical mistake. They fought like a species that had never truly faced desperation, never been pushed to the absolute edge of survival, where normal rules no longer applied. They expected their enemies to behave logically, to retreat when outnumbered, to surrender when outgunned. They had no idea what humans were capable of when their backs were against the wall. "Captain Wujin, are your pilots ready for this?" Admiral Hyejin asked, turning to face the grizzled fighter wing commander, who stood nearby studying his own tactical readouts. Captain Wujin Nam looked up with a savage grin that transformed his scarred face into something that would have terrified any sane person. The left side of his face bore the twisted marks of shrapnel from the brutal Martian campaigns, where human colonists had fought each other with a viciousness that shocked even veteran soldiers. Those scars had taught him that sometimes the only way to win was to be willing to lose everything. "Admiral, my pilots have been dreaming about this moment ever since we got the news about New Harmony," he replied, his voice filled with barely controlled rage. "These alien pieces of garbage are about to learn why humans invented the concept of aerial dogfighting. They're going to discover what happens when you attack people who've been perfecting the art of killing each other in 3-dimensional combat for over a century." The human fighter squadron was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Their ships were a bizarre mixture of human engineering and salvaged alien technology, cobbled together in orbital shipyards by mechanics who had learned to make miracles out of scrap metal and determination. The hulls had been reinforced with pieces of crystalline armor stripped from destroyed Vorthan vessels, giving them an odd patchwork appearance that somehow made them look even more dangerous. The ambush began with the sudden appearance of 30 human fighters dropping out of hyperspace directly above the Vorthan convoy. But instead of engaging in the long-range energy weapon duels that characterized most galactic warfare, the human pilots did something that defied all military logic. They accelerated straight toward the alien ships at maximum speed, ignoring the deadly energy beams that lanced out to meet them. The Vorthan convoy commander watched in growing horror as the primitive human fighters swarmed his formation like angry insects attacking a giant. These weren't the careful, measured tactics used by civilized space forces. This was pure animalistic aggression that turned every engagement into a potential disaster. Lieutenant Yunji Park's fighter screamed through the void toward the largest Vorthan supply ship, her cockpit filled with alarms warning her about the massive energy buildup in the alien vessel's weapons systems. She ignored every single warning, her face twisted into a mask of fury as she thought about all the innocent people who had died on the Outer Rim colonies. "This is for New Harmony, you alien scum," Yunji screamed into her communicator as her fighter's collision course became irreversible. Her ship slammed into the supply vessel's engine core at nearly light speed, and the resulting explosion created a miniature star that consumed 3 additional Vorthan ships in its expanding sphere of destruction. All around the convoy, similar scenes of controlled chaos unfolded as human pilots used ramming attacks, precisely timed explosions, and suicidal courage to tear apart the alien formation. They didn't try to match the Vorthan's superior firepower or advanced technology. Instead, they used the one advantage that no other species in the galaxy possessed: their complete willingness to die if it meant taking their enemies with them. On the Vorthan command ship, Admiral Veltar stared at his tactical display in complete disbelief as his carefully organized supply convoy dissolved into burning wreckage and floating debris. His aide approached nervously, clutching a damage report that made the situation even worse. "Sir, we're losing ships faster than our shipyards can replace them," the aide reported, his voice trembling with barely controlled panic. Admiral Veltar's alien features twisted with frustration as he realized the terrible truth. The humans had found a way to turn their technological disadvantage into a strategic nightmare that threatened his entire war effort. The massive command vessel, Eternal Dominion, had always been a symbol of Vorthan power and confidence. Its pristine corridors and gleaming metal walls had witnessed countless victory celebrations as the Empire expanded across the galaxy. But today, the atmosphere in the main War Council chamber felt heavy with dread and uncertainty. The assembled commanders sat around the holographic table with faces that showed none of their usual arrogance. Admiral Veltar stood at the head of the table, his alien features drawn with exhaustion and something his species rarely experienced: fear. The reports scattered across the table told a story that seemed impossible just months ago. The humans weren't just surviving their invasion, they were actually pushing back and winning battles that should have been hopeless defeats. "The situation has become problematic," Admiral Veltar began, his voice lacking the commanding tone that had once struck terror into conquered worlds. "The humans have somehow managed to liberate 4 occupied planets in just the past month. This is unprecedented in the history of our empire." Commander Zekhan, his crystalline armor bearing fresh scars from a recent battle, activated the holographic display with shaking hands. The images that appeared made several officers recoil in disgust and horror. "They're not just using captured weapons against us," he reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "They're modifying our own ships in ways that violate every principle of civilized warfare." The hologram showed the aftermath of the battle at Kepler Station, where human forces had somehow managed to capture several Vorthan vessels and transform them into nightmarish weapons of war. The elegant curves of alien engineering had been brutally modified with crude ramming prows welded to the front. Suicide bomber mechanisms had been installed throughout the ships, turning each vessel into a potential explosive device. Weapons systems had been rewired to maximize damage rather than achieve the clean, efficient victories that the Empire preferred. "Look at this abomination," Zekhan continued, pointing to a captured Vorthan cruiser that had been turned into something that looked more like a medieval battering ram than a sophisticated starship. "They've stripped away all the safety systems, removed the crew quarters and packed it full of explosives. It's designed for one purpose only, to ram into our ships and detonate. Another commander, his voice trembling with shame, added the worst news yet. Our Terracon allies have formally requested permission to withdraw from all operations in human-controlled space. They say the humans fight like demons from the void, and that no amount of payment is worth facing them in battle. The Terraconians had been the Empire's most reliable mercenary allies for over 2 centuries. They were professional soldiers who had never retreated from any battlefield, no matter how dangerous. The fact that they were now refusing to fight humans sent a chill through every Vorthon officer present. Meanwhile, thousands of light years away on Earth, Colonel Daehyun Park stood among the smoking ruins of what had once been London's financial district. The Vorthon occupation had turned the ancient city into a prison camp, but now human forces had broken through the alien defenses and were systematically liberating every captive they could find. The scene around him would have warmed the heart of any human commander. Freed prisoners, both human and alien, worked side by side to treat the wounded and organize supplies. The Vorthons had made a critical mistake by imprisoning members of different species together. Instead of creating divisions, it had allowed humans to share their knowledge of resistance and guerrilla warfare with anyone willing to learn. "Colonel, sir, you need to see this," Sergeant Min-Hyuk Yang called out as he approached with a group of recently freed alien prisoners. "The Altarian captives want to join our military forces. Apparently, they've got some very serious grudges against the Vorthons that go back generations." Colonel Daehyun looked at the group of freed aliens, seeing the same hard determination in their eyes that he recognized in his own soldiers. The Altarians were tall, thin beings with blue-tinted skin and large eyes that seemed to glow with inner fire. They had been peaceful traders before the Vorthon invasion, but months of brutal captivity had transformed them into something very different. "We have watched how you humans fight," their leader spoke in heavily accented but clear English. "You do not surrender. You do not give up. You teach us that sometimes peace can only be won through war. We wish to learn your ways." Daehyun smiled grimly as he watched former enemies begin training together, sharing techniques for making improvised weapons and planning guerrilla attacks. The galaxy was finally learning the most important lesson that humans had discovered long ago. Sometimes, the best teacher is the species that has never known a day of true peace. Operation Prometheus began at exactly 0600 hours across 12 different star systems, launched with the concentrated fury of a species that had been preparing for this moment throughout their entire violent history. General Sunho Lee stood on the bridge of the massive dreadnought Incheon Rising, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he watched hundreds of tactical displays showing the largest coordinated military operation that humanity had ever attempted. The bridge buzzed with controlled chaos as communications officers relayed orders to fleet commanders scattered across thousands of light years of space. This wasn't just Earth's military forces attacking the Vorthon Empire. This was every human survivor, every freed alien prisoner, and every species that had suffered under alien occupation joining together in a single devastating assault that would either end the war or destroy them all in the attempt. "All units across all systems, this is General Sunho Lee speaking," he broadcast on the fleet-wide communication channel, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen too much death to ever back down from a fight. "Today we show this galaxy exactly what happens when you make the mistake of threatening Earth's children. Today, we remind the universe why humans have never learned how to surrender." The response came back from thousands of ships spread across the void, a chorus of voices speaking in dozens of different languages, but all united by the same burning desire for vengeance. Human captains commanded vessels alongside alien allies who had learned to fight using humanity's brutal methods. Former enemies worked side by side on ships that had been welded together from the wreckage of a dozen different battles. Captain Ji-Hoo Kim stood on the bridge of his ship, the Revenge of Harmony, watching as his mixed fleet of human and alien vessels prepared for their assault on the heavily fortified Vorthon position at Beta Centauri. His ship bore the scars of every major battle since the fall of New Harmony, its hull patched with salvaged alien armor and bristling with captured Vorthon weapons that his engineers had modified in ways that violated every principle of safe starship design. The original mining captain who had once hauled ore between the colonies was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. His crew was no longer made up of civilian volunteers and desperate survivors. They were veterans now, seasoned fighters who had learned to turn every disadvantage into a weapon and every moment of weakness into an opportunity for revenge. The assault on the Vorthan stronghold became a perfect demonstration of how humans had learned to adapt their tactics to overcome superior technology. While the alien defenders tried to maintain their rigid formation integrity and fight according to the established rules of galactic warfare, human units flowed around their defenses like deadly water, finding every crack and weakness in their armor. Human ships didn't try to match the aliens' superior firepower in direct confrontations. Instead, they used swarm tactics, coordinated ramming attacks and suicide runs that turned every engagement into a potential catastrophe for the defenders. They fought without regard for their own safety, using their willingness to die as a weapon that no other species knew how to counter. Lieutenant Commander Mare Park led her boarding party through the airlocks and into the corridors of a captured Vorthan battleship, her team moving with the coordinated precision of a pack of wolves that had cornered their prey. Her assault force was a perfect example of how the war had changed everyone involved. Former criminals worked alongside decorated military veterans, while alien volunteers who had learned human fighting methods provided support and technical expertise. They moved through the ship's pristine corridors like a force of nature, showing absolutely no mercy to the alien crew members who had once seemed so invincible. The sterile perfection of Vorthan ship design became a liability as humans used every ventilation shaft, maintenance tunnel, and hidden passage to outflank and overwhelm their enemies. "Remember New Harmony," Mireille shouted as her team stormed onto the bridge, and the battle cry echoed through the communication systems to be taken up by human forces fighting across the entire star system. It was more than just a rallying cry. It was a promise that the galaxy would never forget what happened when someone made the mistake of attacking humanity's children. The Vorthan homeworld of Nexus Prime had existed in perfect peace for over 1,000 years, its crystalline cities stretching toward the heavens like frozen music made of light and geometry. The planet's inhabitants had never heard the sound of explosions or seen the smoke of burning buildings. War was something that happened to other worlds, other species, never to the jewel at the heart of their mighty empire. But now, as Admiral Hyejin Choi's massive invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace and filled their beautiful skies with the dark shadows of human warships, that 1,000-year peace was about to end forever. The communication channels crackled with desperate transmissions from the planet's surface as Vorthan leaders realized the nightmare that was descending upon their perfect world. These were the same beings who had coldly demanded the surrender of dozens of peaceful colonies, who had shown no mercy to civilian populations, who had turned entire star systems into slave camps without a second thought. "Admiral, the planetary government is broadcasting surrender terms," Communications Officer Taehyun reported, from his station aboard the flagship Busan's Wrath. His voice carried a note of uncertainty, as if he couldn't quite believe that their former tormentors were now begging for the same mercy they had never shown to others. Admiral Hyejin Choi's face remained as cold and hard as the vacuum of space itself. Her eyes, which had seen too many friends die in the defense of Earth, showed no trace of the compassion that might have once lived there. "Ignore their transmissions completely," she ordered, her voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing a death sentence. They had their chance to show mercy when they attacked New Harmony and all the other colonies. They chose to give no quarter, so they'll receive none in return. The first human dropships screamed through Nexus Prime's atmosphere like falling meteors, their hulls glowing red-hot from the friction of their rapid descent. General Sun Ho Lee stood in the lead transport, surrounded by veteran soldiers who bore the scars of every major battle in the war. These weren't fresh recruits or desperate volunteers anymore. They were hardened warriors who had learned to fight the galaxy's most advanced military force and win. The pristine Vorthan cities, with their impossible architecture and crystalline spires that had stood unchanged for centuries, became brutal battlegrounds as human forces and their alien allies began the systematic destruction of the Empire's last stronghold. There was no attempt to preserve the beautiful buildings or protect the artistic treasures that the Vorthans had collected from across the galaxy. This wasn't a liberation or a police action. This was the complete dismantling of a civilization that had proven itself incapable of coexistence with the rest of the galaxy. Captain Wu Jin Nam's fighter squadron tore through the crystal spires like bullets through glass, their weapons turning architectural marvels that had taken centuries to build into clouds of glittering dust and smoking rubble. The pilots showed no hesitation as they destroyed irreplaceable works of art and engineering. They had seen what the Vorthans did to human colonies, and they felt no obligation to preserve the culture of a species that had shown no respect for anyone else's. There was no elegance in the human assault, no careful precision designed to minimize collateral damage. This was the grim efficiency of warriors who had learned through bitter experience that sometimes total victory required total destruction. The humans fought like they had learned to fight on Earth, with the understanding that some enemies could only be stopped when they no longer possessed the ability to threaten anyone ever again. Deep within the Imperial Palace, the last surviving Vorthan commanders huddled around their tactical displays, watching in horror as their perfect world burned. Around them, the beautiful gardens where they had walked in peace for centuries were now filled with the smoke of battle. The crystal towers that had been symbols of their technological superiority lay in ruins beneath the boots of human soldiers. For the first time in their species' history, they truly understood what they had awakened when they made the fatal mistake of attacking humanity's colonies. Earth's children didn't just fight wars to achieve political objectives or territorial gains. They fought wars to finish them permanently, ensuring that their enemies would never again possess the power to threaten innocent people. Sergeant Minhyuk Yang climbed through the rubble of the Vorthan Senate building, the same structure where the Empire's leaders had once planned the conquest of peaceful worlds. With reverent hands, he planted Earth's flag among the ruins, its blue and green colors snapping proudly in the wind that carried the smoke of a fallen empire across the devastated landscape. Part 9. The New Galactic Order. 1 full year had passed since the mighty Nexus Prime fell from the sky like a burning mountain. The galaxy still remembered that terrible day when humanity's rage finally broke the Vorthan Empire's iron grip on the stars. Now, something completely new was taking shape among the scattered worlds. Admiral Hyejin Choi walked slowly through the corridors of New Harmony Station. This wasn't the same broken wreck that had once served the Vorthans. Human engineers and alien workers had rebuilt it from the ground up, making it bigger and stronger than before. The walls hummed with new energy, and the air itself felt different. It carried the scent of hope, mixed with the metallic tang of fresh construction. The great assembly hall buzzed with voices, speaking dozens of different languages. Representatives from liberated worlds had traveled across vast distances to be here today. Some flew in sleek ships, others arrived in patched-together vessels held together by determination and spare parts. What united them all was something the galaxy hadn't seen in generations, the chance to decide their own fate. Hyejin stepped up to the speaking platform. The room fell silent as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Some belonged to species that looked almost human, while others were so alien that their very presence seemed impossible. Yet they all shared something now. They had all tasted freedom, and they refused to give it up. The Vorthan Empire taught us something important, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. They showed us that peace isn't simply the absence of fighting. Real peace only exists when brave people are willing to stand up and defend it. Scattered applause rippled through the crowd, but Hyejin held up her hand. She wasn't finished yet. For too long, this galaxy accepted slavery as normal. Worlds surrendered without firing a shot because they thought resistance was hopeless. The Vorthans convinced everyone that their empire was too big, too strong, too advanced to ever fall. She paused, letting her words sink in. In the front rows, she could see former slaves who still bore the marks of Vorthan torture devices. Behind them sat planetary governors who had watched their people suffer for decades under alien rule. But humanity proved something that day we destroyed their capital ship. No empire is too strong when free people decide to fight back. No enemy is invincible when you're willing to pay the ultimate price for victory. The applause was louder this time, filled with emotion that went beyond mere approval. These beings had lived through the worst kinds of oppression, and now they were witnessing something their ancestors could never have imagined: the birth of a truly free galactic civilization. Meanwhile, on the red plains of Mars, Colonel Dae-hyun Park watched a very different kind of gathering. The Terran Military Academy had expanded far beyond its original purpose. What started as a training ground for human soldiers had become something much more significant: the first institution in galactic history dedicated to teaching the art of resistance warfare. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds as alien cadets practiced alongside their human instructors. A group of tall, blue-skinned Altarians worked through close-quarters combat techniques with former Earth Marines. Nearby, small furry beings from the Kepler system learned how to assemble improvised explosive devices from household materials. This wasn't the kind of warfare that had dominated the galaxy for centuries. The Vorthans had relied on massive fleets and overwhelming technological superiority. They conquered through fear and maintained control through brutality. But humanity had shown there was another way to fight, from the shadows, using cunning instead of raw power, turning the enemy's strength against them. War is an ugly thing, Dae-hyun told his mixed class of students during their morning briefing. Anyone who tells you it's glorious or noble is either lying or has never seen real combat. War destroys everything it touches. It breaks bodies, minds, and souls. The young faces before him, some human, some decidedly not, listened with the intense focus that only comes from knowing your life might depend on these lessons. Many of them had already seen their worlds burn. They understood that pretty words about honor and glory meant nothing when your family was being marched into slave camps. But sometimes, Dae-hyun continued, war becomes necessary. When peaceful solutions fail, when diplomacy becomes impossible, when the choice is between fighting and watching everything you love disappear forever, that's when good people have to become warriors. He gestured toward the weapons display, along the classroom wall. Unlike the energy cannons and plasma rifles favored by traditional galactic armies, these were simpler tools, explosive charges that could be hidden in cargo containers, communication devices that looked like ordinary household items, weapons that could be manufactured in any basic workshop. The Vorthans had better ships, better armor, better technology in every possible way, but they made one crucial mistake. They never learned how to fight an enemy that refused to meet them in open battle. They couldn't adapt when their opponents used unconventional tactics. A young Altarian raised her hand. "Colonel, what if we face another empire like the Vorthans? What if someone else tries to conquer the galaxy, using the same methods?" Dae-hyun smiled grimly. "That's exactly why you're here. We're not just training soldiers, we're creating teachers. Each of you will return to your homeworld with knowledge that can be passed on to others. If another empire rises, if another species tries to impose their will on free worlds, they'll face something the Vorthans never encountered." He paused for effect. "They'll face a galaxy that knows how to fight back. Far from Mars, in the Outer Rim territories where space pirates and smugglers had once operated with impunity, Captain Ji-hoo Kim guided his patrol vessel through a routine security sweep. The New Harmony's Guardian wasn't the largest ship in the fleet, but it represented something important: the visible presence of galactic law enforcement. The bridge was quieter than those on the massive battleships that had fought at Nexus Prime. Only a dozen crew members worked at their stations, monitoring communication channels and scanning for potential threats. But Ji-hoo knew that size wasn't everything. His ship carried something more valuable than heavy weapons or thick armor: the respect of every world in this sector. "Captain," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a distress signal from the mining colony on Kepler 4142b. They're reporting raiders in the system." Ji-hoo didn't hesitate. "Set course immediately. Maximum speed." As the Guardian's engines roared to life, he reflected on how much had changed. Before the war, colonies like Kepler 442b would have been on their own. The Vorthans only protected worlds that paid massive tribute, and even then help often arrive too late to matter. Independent colonies were considered expendable, but humanity had introduced a radical new concept to galactic civilization, the idea that all free worlds deserved protection, regardless of their size or strategic importance. It was a principle that cost resources and required constant vigilance, but it was also what separated the new order from the old empire. The Guardian dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler 442b, just as 3 pirate vessels were approaching the mining platforms. These weren't sophisticated warships, just converted cargo haulers with added weapons and reinforced hulls. In the old days, they would have been more than enough to terrorize a small colony. Unknown vessels, Jihu broadcast on all frequencies. This is Captain Kim of the Galactic Defense Force. You are ordered to withdraw immediately from this system. The response came back filled with static and bravado. 1 little patrol boat against 3 raiders. You humans have gotten too confident since you beat the Vorthans. Jihu allowed himself a small smile. These pirates clearly didn't understand what they were facing. The Guardian might be small, but it carried weapons designed by the same engineers who had created humanity's planet-killing arsenal. More importantly, it was crewed by veterans who had learned their trade in the most brutal war the galaxy had ever seen. "This is your final warning," he said calmly. "Withdraw now, or face the consequences." The pirate's answer came in the form of plasma bolts streaking toward his ship. Jihu's crew responded with the precision of a surgical instrument. Within minutes, 2 of the raider vessels were drifting hulks, and the third was limping away with its engines barely functional. As they helped evacuate survivors from the disabled ships, Jihu thought about the broader meaning of this small engagement. Every successful intervention like this sent a message throughout the outer rim. The age of easy prey was over. Predators who had grown fat on the suffering of defenseless colonies now faced real consequences for their actions. But the new galactic order was about more than just military strength. In the weeks following the establishment of the Defense Council, trade routes that had been abandoned for decades began to reopen. Worlds that had hidden in isolation started reaching out to their neighbors. Scientific knowledge that had been hoarded by the Vorthans was now being shared freely among member civilizations. On New Harmony Station, Hyejin watched daily reports streaming in from across the galaxy. Former slave worlds were rebuilding their economies. Species that had been forbidden from developing advanced technology were now constructing their own starships. Children who had grown up knowing only oppression were learning to read and write. In schools built with materials donated by dozens of different worlds. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still worlds that preferred isolation to cooperation, still individuals who tried to profit from chaos and suffering. But something fundamental had changed in the galaxy's character. The assumption that might makes right had been shattered forever. "Admiral," her aide approached with the latest intelligence summary, "we've received confirmation that the last Vorthan holdout systems have agreed to the peace terms. Their remaining fleets are being decommissioned, and their weapons stockpiles are being destroyed under international supervision." Hyejin nodded, but she didn't feel the satisfaction she had expected. Victory was supposed to feel different somehow, more complete, more final. Instead, she found herself thinking about all the work that still lay ahead. What about their leadership, she asked. The governors and military commanders who carried out the worst atrocities. Most are being processed through the war crimes tribunals. Some have been sentenced to life imprisonment, others to mandatory service in reconstruction efforts on the worlds they helped destroy. Justice was another concept that the galaxy was still learning to implement fairly. The Vorthans had ruled, through fear and punishment, but they had never bothered with actual justice. Their legal system existed only to maintain control, not to protect the innocent or punish the guilty in any meaningful sense. Creating something better was proving to be one of the most difficult challenges of the post-war period. How do you punish someone for crimes against entire civilizations? How do you ensure that justice is served without perpetuating the cycle of violence and revenge that had torn the galaxy apart for so long? Hyejin walked to the observation deck and looked out at the stars. Somewhere among those distant points of light were billions of beings who were experiencing freedom for the first time in their lives. They were making mistakes, learning hard lessons, sometimes failing completely. But they were doing it as free citizens of their own worlds, not as property of an alien empire. That, she realized, was what victory actually looked like. Not the dramatic explosion of a capital ship or the surrender of enemy fleets, but the quiet daily work of building something better from the ashes of what came before. The Vorthan Empire was truly gone now, but its legacy would linger for generations. The scars it left on countless worlds would take decades to heal. The trauma it inflicted on entire species would be passed down through their children and grandchildren. But alongside that dark inheritance, there was something else. The knowledge that even the mightiest tyranny could be brought down by people who refused to accept defeat. As she stood there watching the stars, Hyejin knew that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization wasn't their military technology or their tactical brilliance. It was something much simpler and much more powerful. The stubborn insistence that freedom was worth any sacrifice and that no one should have to live as a slave in their own galaxy. The new order was far from perfect, but it was theirs to build and defend, and that made all the difference.